Manager at the Tennessee Department of Education. I also have Heather Farley, the Director of ESSA Oversight, on the call with me today as well. Today's webinar will be recorded and slides will be available in ePlan and TDE Resources. At the Tennessee Department of Education, we ground our work in our strategic plan, Best for All. The plan focuses on 3 priorities: academics, student readiness, and educators for all Tennessee students. As you all know, the work we are doing with students in transition is strongly connected to all 3 of the areas, and the support that you provide to educators, students, and families is crucial. For this webinar, I will do a quick overview of McKinney-Vento rights and the definition under the Act. I will do an overview of the subgrant purpose and funding requirements. I will discuss subgrant monitoring and reporting. We will look at the application components and strategies for submitting a robust application, and I'll wrap up with questions, resources, and we'll take a look at the application in ePlan. Okay. And just so you know, we are recording. Oh, I've already mentioned that we're recording today. Okay. Give me just a second. I'm looking to get everyone in the chat here. All right, Heather, I, for some reason, cannot find my chat box. So if there's any questions that come in, can you please let me know?
Will do.
Thank you. So again, the information covered on this presentation can be found in the McKinney-Vento Subgrant Technical Application Guide, which is going to be an ePlan, in TDE Resources, Title IX, Part A, Education for Homeless Children and Youth, under McKinney-Vento Homeless Grant Documents and Information. It's not in there at this minute, but it will be by the end of close of business day today. So you're welcome to go check that out. Well. Sorry guys, I'm not sure what's happening here. Me. Okay, I apologize. The purpose of the McKinney-Vento Education for Homeless Children and Youth EHCY program is to ensure that each homeless child or youth has equal access to the same free and public education, including a public preschool education as provided to other children and youth. Let's look at the goals of the homeless education program. The U.S. Department of Education has set a standard for the overall statewide graduation rate for students experiencing homelessness. The standard is 90% or above. In Tennessee, the 2018-2019 graduation rate was 89.7%. The 2019-2020 graduation rate was 89.6%. And the 2020-2021 graduation rate for students was 88.7%. So you can see we had a decrease in 2019-2020. Before the pandemic, Tennessee's high school graduation rate was on an upward trend since 2013. And in 2019, the state set a record high of 89.7% of students earning a high school diploma within the 4 years. Among that student group, we saw the steepest drops with the migrant, the homeless, and the indigenous populations. Meanwhile, the graduation rates for Asian students and Hispanic students improved. The percentage of English learners who earned a diploma on time slightly grew the population with the lowest graduation rate compared to other groups. Economically disadvantaged was at 80.8%. The English learners was 71%, and the homeless students was 72%. So under the federal law, the definition of homeless under the McKinney-Vento Act is children or youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, including children and youth who are sharing the housing of other persons due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or similar reasons, living in a motel, hotel, trailer park, or campground due to lack of alternate adequate accommodations, living in emergency or transitional shelters or abandoned in hospitals, living in a public or private place not designed for or ordinarily used as a regular sleeping accommodation for human beings, living in cars, parks, public spaces, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, bus or train stations, or similar settings, and who are migratory children living in the above circumstances. So the new McKinney-Vento Subgrant Application opens in ePlan this coming Monday, April 18th, and is due on or before April 18th, and then is due on May 18th. As you have heard me mention, all LEAs are eligible to apply for the McKinney-Vento Subgrant, regardless of the number of homeless students served. The McKinney-Vento Subgrant runs on a 3-year cycle. Award subgrantees will receive funds for FY23, 24, and 25. The grant application must contain a plan for all 3 years of the grant. So here are some important dates to mark on your calendars. Again, like I said, the McKinney-Vento Subgrant application opens this Monday, April 18th, and is due on or before Monday, May 18th. The application will close in ePlan at 11:59 Central on May 18th, 2022. Once the application is submitted, the team will review the application for allowability from ePlan open date to May 31st. All corrections will need to be completed and submitted on or before May 31st. June 1st to 24th, the review team will begin to review submitted applications. And on or before July 5th, the applicants will be notified of the final application status and the next steps. And then on July 5th, allocations will be loaded into ePlan, and the LEA can begin budgeting revisions. The purpose of the McKinney-Vento Subgrant is to facilitate the enrollment, the attendance, and success in the School of Homeless Children and Youth. The subgrant guidelines, they need to serve, services provided cannot replace regular academic programming, and the services must be designed to expand upon or improve the school's regular academic programs. Well, applicants can identify more than one goal from each focus area. At minimum, applicants must identify at least one goal and one activity in each of the following 3 focus areas: regular school attendance by students in transition, identification of homeless children and youth, and reducing academic achievement goals. I will go into that a little bit more detail in the application itself a little later on. Like any federal grant, McKinney-Vento Subgrant should add to or supplement and not replace or supplant other funds, including state or local funds, ARP Homeless 1.0 and 2.0 funds, or other federal funds such as ESSER, Title I, etc. It's important to note that the McKinney-Vento Subgrant does allow for braiding of funds. So when you're planning for the subgrant, consider how funds can work together and coordinate with other funding streams, again, such as Title I, Part A, Homeless Set Aside, ESSER 1, ESSER 2.0, ESSER 3.0, your ARP Homeless 1.0 and 2.0. So let's talk a little bit about allowable use of funds. Subgrant funds can be used for tutoring, supplemental instruction, enriched educational services that are linked to the achievement of the same challenging state academic content standard. Note that if the LEA has a tutoring program supported through other funding sources and is being provided to all students in the LEA, the McKinney-Vento Subgrant funds cannot be used. If your LEA does not have a tutoring program in place or the student needs additional tutoring, subgrant funds can be used for these services. McKinney-Vento funds can and should be used for the professional development of school staff on the McKinney-Vento Act and heightening the LEA's protocols for identifying and serving homeless children and youth. You want to ensure that all LEA personnel providing McKinney-Vento services, such as your superintendents, your registers, your transportation directors, your school counselors, your school social workers, your principals, your Title I directors, teachers, janitorial staff, and cafeteria staff are all receiving this professional development on the identification of homeless children and youth. Funds can be used for referral services to homeless children and youth for medical, dental, mental, and other health services. It also includes counseling services to address anxiety related to homelessness that is impeding learning, outreach services to students living in shelters. McKinney-Vento funding can be used to pay for expedited evals to determine needed services for homeless students, such as program services for students that may be gifted, for children with disabilities, or maybe children English learners. It's important to note that these subgrant funds cannot be used for actual services and treatments or for co-pays, medical bills, or medication. However, the subgrant funds can be used to purchase eyeglasses and hearing aids. Funds can be used to associate the defray the excess cost of transportation for students not otherwise provided through federal, state, or local funding where necessary to enable students to attend school. It is important to remember that subgrant funds are intended to meet the range of needs for homeless students, and you're not wanting to use the subgrant funds for solely transportation. And I do understand transportation is a big cost with LEAs, but these funds are meant to make your program more robust and help with all of those fundings. Funds can be used for the developmentally appropriate early childhood education programs, not otherwise provided through federal, state, or local funding for preschool-aged homeless children. McKinney-Vento funds can be used to develop communication tools, resources, MOUs, policies, and other best practices with local Head Start programs. You can collaborate with your pre-K programs, your Head Start programs, and your other early education programs in the area, and really use this funding to help with those early childhood needs. McKinney-Vento funds can be used on the provision of homeless children and youth for before and after school care, mentoring and summer programs in which a teacher or other qualified individual provides tutoring, homework assistance, supervision of education activities. McKinney-Vento funds can be used to provide mentors for McKinney-Vento students to help with post-secondary applications or course selections. A mentor can help provide morning meetups to help the student get ready for school or maybe for the week. You want to increase the work time of support staff to assist with re-evaluations, identification, and setting up the needed services. McKinney-Vento funds can be used to pay for CTE courses and other needed supplies associated with CTE or any other supplies needed for academics, such as calculators or other needed supplies. Dual enrollment for college classes or credit recovery classes are a good use of McKinney-Vento funds as well. If necessary, the payment for fees or other costs associated with tracking, obtaining, and transferring records necessary to enroll homeless children and youth in school, including your birth certificates, your immunizations, or other required records, academic records, guardianship records, evaluations for special programs and services. Again, remember that McKinney-Vento funds can only be used for the student. Money is not meant to support the whole family. For example, if a parent needs to get a driver's license or a parent needs something for a work documentation, these funds are not meant to serve the parent, but to help the student with its academic success and educational success. McKinney-Vento funds can be used to provide training to community partners on the McKinney-Vento Act and develop an MOU for working together to meet the needs of students experiencing homelessness. Funds can be used to identify professional development activities that you can conduct on the McKinney-Vento Act to support community partnerships and increase identification, increase your collaboration and your services that your students need. You can provide training to the parents and guardians of homeless children and youth about the rights and the resources available to them and to the children and youth. And other activities designed to increase meaningful involvement. Again, meaningful involvement, paying for them to go, for the parents to come to a football game is not necessarily meaningful involvement. You really want to look at paying for those academic related family engagement nights. Funds can be used for the provision of specialized instruction support services, including violence prevention counseling, and referrals for such services, activities to address particular needs of homeless children and youth that may arise from domestic violence or parental mental health or substance abuse problems. McKinney-Vento funds can be used to adapt a room or space in a non-school facility, such as a shelter. The key to this is that any supplies and spaces used for McKinney-Vento students, the LEA will need to show that those supplies and that computer is only being used by your McKinney-Vento students and families for the need of academic and educational purposes. The provision of school supplies, including the supplies to be distributed to shelters or temporary housing facilities. Again, these items are allowable, but you have to show how your McKinney-Vento students are the ones using these items. Funds can be used on any expense necessary to facilitate the identification, enrollment, and retention and educational success of homeless children and youth. I keep talking about identification. So identification can be the heightened awareness in the community of what services are available for homeless children and youth through McKinney-Vento. That may be hiring additional part-time staff, such as retired teachers, parents, or unaccompanied homeless youth to assist by putting up posters and making the McKinney-Vento available services out in the community. Purchasing needed supplies, PPE, eyeglasses, school supplies, personal care items. Items would include backpacks, notebooks, and other needed school supplies. Obtain and distribute school supplies and materials for summer tutorial services, summer learning packets, and or when students return to school. Again, while food is an allowable use of funds, it is required that the LEA exhaust all other community organizations, churches, food banks before purchasing food with McKinney-Vento funds. Food that is bought for McKinney-Vento students, again, goes back to you're only supplying the food to the student and not the entire family. And then funds can be used for extraordinary emergency assistance needed to enable homeless children and youth to attend school. Remember, that full participation engagement is an overreaching goal of McKinney-Vento funding. So full participation engagement means attending classes and participating fully in other school activities. This may include participating in extracurricular activities such as chorus, football, cheerleading, uniforms, and other fees associated with these activities. So before we go into funding amounts, are there any questions? Okay, we'll keep going. Terms of the subgrant are congruent upon the annual state allocation, which is sourced by the U.S. Department of Education through the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Assistance Improvements Act of 2001. Allocation amounts are calculated on a per pupil basis based on the LEA's reported count of students experiencing homelessness in the school year of 2021-22. I'll give you just a few minutes to look at the subgrant expected ranges. So again, this is just a funding range. It may vary a little bit depending on our final allocation amounts from the U.S. Department of Education. May request additional funds beyond their tier bracket. Additional funds will be awarded based on the availability of funds, the quality of the LEA submitted grant application and homeless program, and the rationale used to support the request for additional funds. Applicants must satisfy the following criteria to express a need for additional funding within the application. Title I, Part A, homeless set-aside amount provided must equal at least 10% of the subgrant application request. The LEA must describe the process used to determine the amount of Title I, Part A, homeless set-aside. The LEA must provide a narrative expressing the need for additional funding and how the funds will benefit the LEA's homeless education program. A reminder of general budget narrative requirements for all proposed expenditures. As with all federal education funds, McKinney-Vento purchased must be reasonable. in the proposed goods and services not excessive in cost and are based on prudent and sound purchasing practices. Necessary in that the goods and services are essential for carrying out the grant program as indicated in the McKinney-Vento Subgrant Application, and allowable in the goods and services that are specifically meant to benefit the benefit of the grant and meet the program's intent of objectives.
Hey, Vanessa, before you start that next section, you do have a question, if you don't mind me reading it to you.
Okay.
It says, where can the McKinney-Vento professional development materials be found? That's the first one.
Those can be found in TDOE resources. So those breadcrumbs that I have given you on the slide deck, if you go into that section in TDOE, it'll have all the McKinney-Vento slide decks and other information that you can use for PD for your staff.
And then the second one, when you were talking about healthcare referrals, you stated they can't pay for things like co-pays or the actual appointment, but we can pay for glasses, hearing aids, anything else you would add that we are allowed to use our funds for.
That really, when it comes to it, it's a case-by-case situation when you're looking at medical needs. For example, I did have someone reach out to me and a student needed a knee brace for him to be able to come to school. And so because that was a necessary need and the cost was, I think, $50, it wasn't excessive, then it was an allowable piece because that was something that was needed for that student to be able to participate in school. Again, so those are one of those things that you have to really kind of step back and look at. Okay, am I going to pay $4,000 for a knee brace? That's going to take up most of my homeless funds. So that's not necessary and reasonable. But $50 so the student can still continue to come to school is definitely necessary and reasonable. So that's kind of what you'll look at when you're trying to decide if it's allowable. Heather, any other questions?
That's it.
Okay, so we'll go into the reporting and the monitoring of the grant. The mid-year performance review is an extension of the subgrant application. This review will allow LEAs to reflect on what has been working within the homeless program and the areas that might need refinement. LEAs will be required to complete this document utilizing goals and activities that were included in the original FY23 subgrant application. This report is typically due annually in January and is collected and submitted in the data and information area of ePlan. Also, part of the mid-year performance review, subgrantees are also required subgrantees are required to attend a mid-year check-in with the McKinney-Vento grant manager. This meeting will allow the LEA and the grant manager to look at relevant LEA items and school-level data and to discuss the implementation of the subgrant and determine if any adjustments for the grant programming are needed. The McKinney-Vento grant manager will contact subgrantees to schedule a check-in once the mid-year performance reviews have been reviewed. And as it gets closer to mid-year time, more information will be emailed out to each subgrantee. The next required document is a closeout report. The annual closeout report helps provide information, data, and evidence of quality program implementation, opportunities for program development, and considerations for future funding. The annual reporting period is July 1 through June 1. The report is typically due annually in June and is completed and submitted in the data and information section of ePlan. The initial grant application should provide a solid plan for all 3 years of the subgrant, which is FY23, 24, and 25. Subgrant recipients must express a need for continued funding each year of the grant cycle through the submission of the McKinney-Vento closeout report and satisfying the standards of the McKinney-Vento Statement of Assurances, which can be found in the subgrant application of the assurances page. Failure to satisfy these requirements annually places the LEA at risk for losing funds in the subsequent funding years, and the LEA may be required to reapply for the subgrant. And then just a quick renewing the subgrant, LEAs who meet the annual requirements outlined above do not need to reapply for the grant. Rather, the LEAs will simply complete the budget pages on the application and ePlan each year. If, however, at any time during the 3 years of the grant, the LEA wishes to make major changes to programming, it was written in the original grant application. The homeless liaison must contact the state McKinney-Vento grant manager to request a Title IX McKinney-Vento Subgrant Plan a justification form, and then we can discuss that once you reach out for that information. So is there any other questions before we actually jump into the application? Okay, so anyone wishing to access the application ePlan must have the correct ePlan user access role, which is the LEA Title IX McKinney-Vento Director. Users with existing ePlan access can check their current user access roles. To view existing access, visit ePlan.tn.gov and navigate to the address book and LEA role contacts and view who is listed with the LEA Title IX McKinney-Vento Director role. New ePlan users and existing ePlan users who need a new user access role must request the additional role using the ePlan user access form for LEAs, and that can be found again on ePlan, TDOE resources, user access forms, and all of this will be on the slide deck and in the tech guide as well. To access the McKinney-Vento Subgrant application, you're going to navigate to the Title IX McKinney-Vento application for the ePlan homepage by hovering over your mouse and hovering over the funding tab on the left menu, then selecting funding applications. Then you'll select the desired fiscal year, which will be 2023 in the upper left corner of the screen. And your funding applications are stored in ePlan according to your state fiscal year. For example, 2023 indicates the 2022-23 school year. So you're going to click on the application name to open the application. Make sure that you click draft started. It gets me several times where I'll start working in an application and didn't hit draft started. And if you do not click draft started, you will not be able to, all your fields in the application will remain gray. Use the sections page to access each section of the Title IX McKinney-Vento Subgrant application from the sections page. For easy navigation, users may return to the sections page by going to the funding tab on the ePlan blue menu bar and selecting sections. It does sound like a lot, but once you're actually in ePlan and working around in there, it's fairly easy. And so there is a history log that will where document statuses will be changed along with the name of the user who prompted the change and the date of the change. You'll be able to see, use it to review who submitted or who reviewed an application or the date when it was last approved or returned. And so we have the McKinney-Vento Subgrant checklist. This is going to be new. I know for those subgrantees last year, there was not a checklist, but we've added a checklist this year. So after you submit the initial FY23 Title IX McKinney-Vento Subgrant application, the state McKinney-Vento grant manager will review the applications for general allowability under the McKinney-Vento Act. A list of allowable use of funds can be found on page 6 that we just went through of the technical guide, as well as the National Center for Homeless Education website, and then again in the toolkit. So if you need to look to kind of dig in a little bit more about allowable use, those are where you can find those items. If revisions are needed, the McKinney-Vento grant manager will mark attention needed in the application section of the McKinney-Vento Subgrant checklist and will return the application to the LEA and ePlan. The LEA will be notified through an email from ePlan that the application has been returned. The LEA will make any requested revisions and resubmit the application. The process will repeat itself until the application is ready for final review by the grant team. It's important to note that once the initial application is submitted, LEAs should be prepared to make any requested revisions quickly and before May 31st, as not to delay review of the final application by their grant review team. Once ready for final review, the application will be scored against a rubric, and that is in the appendix of the technical guide by the grant review team. Each application will be evaluated by a minimum of 2 grant reviewers, and the highest scoring applications will be recommended for funding. All applicants will be notified of final application status by email on or before July 5th of 2022. So this is the cover page, and it's pretty self-explanatory. All of these fields must be filled out in order to submit your application. Please do make sure that whoever the McKinney-Vento Homeless Liaison that's going to be contacted about this subgrant is the person that is listed on this. This is how I will be looking at information and reaching out to you by the person that's on this list. All right, let's take a look at the budget. So budget narrative should be detailed enough to show that items and amounts budgeted are allowable, reasonable, and necessary for the implementation of the grant activities, and what activities are being implemented and what is being purchased. These purchases and programs must meet the supplement, not supplant provision. And if positions are being funded, include your position titles and full-time equivalent FTEs in the narrative. So the ePlan process for entering the McKinney-Vento Subgrant Application budget is consistent with all other grants in ePlan. Each LEA must have a department-approved budget in ePlan before requesting reimbursement. The initial FY23 Subgrant Application LEA should provide a budget for the total amount of funds being requested. For example, if the LEA is requesting $75,000 in FY23, a budget for the full request should be entered into the budget pages as described below. So adding budget details on your budget page, it is recommended that if you are not familiar with the ePlan and budgeting, that you get with your LEA fiscal consultant or director to assist you with this budgeting piece of the application. To access the budget, you're going to click budget link from the sections page. For each budget line that the LEA plans to use, you're going to click modify, located on the left of the account number to open the budget detail page for that line item. On the budget detail page for the line item, you're going to click add budget detail. And then for each budget detail, you're going to choose the account number that auto-populates the line. And then you'll select all the appropriate items needed for that particular budget. Once complete, you're going to confirm the amount in the remaining area at the bottom of the budget page. Make sure that you indicate full-time equivalent, FTEs, for all staff paid with grant funds within the budget narrative, and that it matches the FTEs within all areas of the grant application. Items and amount budgeted must be reasonable and necessary for implementation of the grant activities. Again, please refer to the McKinney-Vento Subgrant Tech Guide for the major functions and codes. That is all going to be in there if you have any questions. So let's look at the application. We're going to look at program details. Part 1 of the application is need and rationale. You really want to reflect and prioritize educational, social, emotional, and mental health needs of homeless children and youth served by the LEA. You want to consider all the challenges and needs around the identification, transportation, the housing, the delivery of resources and services, any extracurricular activities, in school attendance. You want to, question number 2 is how are these needs determined and what data was used and what stakeholders were involved. You must address all prompts in order to be able to submit the application. And then the second question on this program these page is for current subgrantee recipients only. And so you want to make sure you address that question and fully answer that. The more details provided, the better it is for the reviewers. So on the same page, you're going to enter the number of homeless students enrolled in the LEA for 2021-22. That's the first column of the chart, and the number of homeless students reported in EIS in 21-22 will be auto-populated in the second column of the chart. You, of course, you'll enter your data for the nighttime residence of homeless students for 2021-22, and then next to that is going to be the auto-populated row. Note if there are any discrepancies between the LEA student count data and the data reported in EIS. You will need to provide a detailed explanation of how and why the LEA will remedy the discrepancies, and how the LEA will ensure that the alignment with all data systems is going to work in the future. And I'll show you all of this in the application once we get started. Here is the chart that I was just talking about. Again, these numbers on the second column will auto-populate, and the first column is where you'll put your information. Part 2, education program description. You're going to describe how the education program and services provided by this grant will meet the identified needs of your LEA Homeless Children and Youth Program. You want to describe the strategy to promote and participate in the participation of students in transition in non-academic programs. And you want to describe how the LEA will promote meaningful engagement of parents, families, guardians, and other providers that are in working with children of homeless children and youth. You want to explain the LEA policies and procedures in place to ensure that students in transition are not isolated or stigmatized. And so with that, in the related documents, there are going to be 3 required documents in order to submit. You must provide the LEA McKinney-Vento dispute resolution. You must provide the homeless policy and procedure, and you must provide the transportation policy and procedure. Those, again, are all required in order to submit your application. Optional, you could add the best interest determination procedure, your nighttime residence form or housing questionnaire, any printed information that you use for your homeless families or children and youth, or your stakeholders, or any other documents that you use to help promote and run your homeless programs. Again, those are optional and do not have to be uploaded. So part 3 is your goals, activities, and outcomes. Like I mentioned earlier, while applicants can identify more than one goal for each focus area, at minimum, applicants must identify at least one goal and one activity of each of 3 focus areas. Including in the response, you want one program goal linked to the focus area. The agency is responsible if other than the LEA. A description of at least one activity that will be implemented to meet the program goals, and a justification that the need of the activity, the data source utilized to measure the effectiveness of the activity, a general time frame for the activity, expected measurable outcomes for the activity, and then you can add a row as needed to this application if you have more than one goal for that particular item. And this is just a screenshot of how it's going to look. It's very familiar to the last application we had. We've just kind of streamlined it a little bit more. Again, please make sure that your narrative descriptions are detailed enough for reviewers to gain a complete understanding of all activity components, including specific details of what is being purchased and implemented. For part 4, coordination and collaboration, it is important when you're working with this, when you're completing this portion of the application, that McKinney-Vento requires a community-based approach to homelessness and education, and LEAs cannot meet the needs of families and youth experiencing homelessness alone. So it's really important that you really work out and collaborate with these community-based organizations. You want to describe how this program will supplement the programs and services provided through other federal, state, and local programs. Complete the 2 tables focused on collaboration. Collaborations within the LEA, describe how grant fund services will coordinate funds with services, and there's a list of all of, in the actual application, there's a list of all the different examples of programs you can coordinate with. For example, Title I Part A, ESSERS 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, ARP, Homeless, IDEA, 21st Century, LEAP, School Nutrition, Family Resource Center, Migrant Education Program, CTE programming. Those are all things you can consider when you're completing this application. So this is for the personnel. You want to make sure you enter the headcounts and FTEs for all staff funded through the grant. And then you have your system-wide personnel page. This is pretty self-explanatory, but you can also check the tech guide if you have any questions. You're going to complete the tables for any school-based, regular school year, or summer school instruction and support positions funded by the grant. Your school-based staff and employees assigned to one or more schools for the predetermined time. And these staff may work full-time at one school or may split their time across 2 or more schools by the LEAs, but they cannot be duplicated. All right, so for training and awareness, under the McKinney-Vento Act, it states that LEA liaisons for homeless children and youth shall ensure that school personnel providing services under the Act receive professional development and other supports. And so in this chart, you're going to provide what your professional development opportunities will be. And you'll provide the audience, the topic, the date that is planned to be delivered, and your mode of delivery. You can add rows as needed for your PD events. You want to describe how the LEA will ensure a homeless liaison or designee will attend the in-person or virtually the National Association for Education of Homeless Children and Youth, NACE conference that is required with the McKinney-Vento Subgrant. And then we're going to look at funding and set-asides. The Title I Part A homeless set-aside amount for 2021-22 will be auto-populated. You'll provide the details of the activities that were provided with the Title I Part A homeless set-aside funds for 21-22. And then you're going to provide the planned amount for activities for Title I Part A homeless set-asides for FY23, for 22-23, 23-24, and 24-25. You also want to provide what percentage of 2021-22 Title I Part A homeless set-aside funds were spent on activities for homeless children and youth. If it was less than 100%, you want to explain that. And then what is the process to determine the amount of Title I homeless set-aside? So then you're going to complete the request for funds. There's a table. It'll include the funds being requested and provide the rationale for the amount. You want to discuss funds and base the request on the coordination of other funds, the number of homeless students served, and the program needs, goals, and activities. Requests should be based only on the amount needed to support the LEA's homeless program. This is new. Again, you're going to put in your funding request. And your request for rationale. The more detail you can provide, the better it is for reviewers. You can refer to the table on page 6 in the tech guide for your tier funding tier guidelines. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you read over your McKinney-Vento subgrant assurances. And then once you have done that, you can click the box at the top left to assure that you have read those assurances and that you are going to comply with that. Again, like I mentioned, there are related documents that are required for this application submission. And then there's the optional, and so you will go into the related document section and upload those required documents. And then once we finish the application, you will go to draft completed. And the application will need to be approved by the LEA fiscal representative and then to the LEA authorized representative, which is your director of schools. And after all level approvals, the application will be reviewed at the department. And we're just about finished, guys. I know it's been a lot of information. Receiving a McKinney-Vento subgrant depends on several factors, including the quality of program and application. You want to follow the guidelines below to ensure a quality application. You want to make sure that you read application instructions and procedures carefully and follow the guidelines outlined in the subgrant technical guide. Provide all requested information for each section of the detailed narratives were requested. You want to ensure clear alignment between the program needs, the rationale, the goals, the activities, the outcomes outlined in the application. You want to utilize the application rubric to ensure all sections of the application have been completed at a high quality level. You want to ensure that only authorized, reasonable, and necessary activities are included. And you want to involve collaborative programs and partners in the planning process. You want to make sure that you allow time for your colleagues to review the proposal before the submission deadline. Again, a reminder, as with all federal educational funds, McKinney-Vento funded purchases must be reasonable and the proposed goods and services that are not excessive in cost and are based on prudent and sound purchasing, necessary in the goods and services that are essential for carrying out the grant program, and allowable in that the goods and services are specifically for the benefit of the grant and meet the program's intent and objectives. A good narrative should be specific enough to determine the allowability and reasonableness of expenditures. So as LEAs are entering budget narratives into ePlan, it's important to keep the following questions in mind. How is it supplemental? What types of items are being purchased? How many items are being purchased? What activities are being funded? Who will participate in the activities? What students are being targeted for the services? When will activities take place? Are services being contracted? If so, with whom? And what specific professional development is taking place, and how many will attend? Again, providing as much detail allows reviewers to get a clear picture of how funds will be used while also showing the activities meet all federal and fiscal requirements. And then at the end of the slide deck, there's resources for you to access. Again, the ePlan TOE resources, the McKinney-Vento Subgrant Technical Guide, your rubric, you got your toolkit, your non-regulatory guidance, which is from the National Center for Homeless Education, and then Schoolhouse Connections also has a lot of resources. I also added Continuum of Care, COC resources that you can also consider putting in your application as well. I know I covered a lot of information. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to also open up the ePlan application and go through that with you. But are there any questions?
Vanessa, I have a quick question. You mentioned something about the national conference, and then you followed up with saying something was required. Do you recall what you said about that?
The NAEC conference is required if you're a subgrantee, and so you have the option of doing it virtually or going in person to the conference, but you will use your McKinney-Vento subgrant funds to pay for that, and you can send your homeless liaison or somebody that's designated to work in your homeless program for that.
Okay, all right, thank you. Just wanted to make sure.
Karen, I see you have your hand up.
I just asked my question.
Okay, that was you. Okay, sorry, Karen.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyone else have any questions? Heather, is there anything in the chat box?
Yes, I don't know when this one was placed, but it was talking about, and they may be able to provide more detail, are the tiers for amount per year or 3-year total?
That's going to be per year. So each year, the U.S. Department of Education sends a new round of funds, and then from that fund, we will divide it out amongst the subgrantee winners.
That was all I see in the chat.
And after this, if there's any questions, feel free to reach out via email or give me a call. I'll be glad to go over anything with you. I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to open up the ePlan application and kind of go through that with you really quick. Okay, let me share my screen. All right, so we are going to use Rutherford County's test. So let's see here. We're going to go into your funding application, as I mentioned at the beginning. Funding application. You're going to make sure you change your date to 2023. You're going to scroll down until you find Title IX McKinney-Vento. Again, make sure that you click Draft Started or you will not be able to complete the application. You're going to have it confirming that you're changing the status. And then you're able to start. So again, here's the cover page. You're going to fill all of this information in. Again, all of the asterisks mean that you must have something in that in order to submit the application. This is where I was talking about your budgeting. For those of you who have not done any budgeting, this is where you're going to modify, as I was speaking about. You're going to add a budget detail. And then you're going to scroll through anything that you need here. We're going to do other student support. And then you're going to put just a narrative of course, I'm going to do a real simple one of what you're going to be budgeting. And we're going to do $500. You're going to hit create. And then you can keep adding your budget details until you have all the things in that you need. All right, so we save that. We're going to leave our budget. And then we're going to go into the programming. Again, I went through all of these questions to make sure that you really read through the question and really think about it and put as much detail as you can as you answer the questions. Auto-populate, you can see will be over here, and then you've got your students enrolled that your information that you will add out of your data. And then again, if you have a lot of discrepancies, you'll need to fill in that information. If there isn't any, then you'll put NA, but this question must be answered, so you will not be able to leave it blank. All right, we'll go to part 2. Again, we went through all of these questions. They're pretty self-explanatory. And then to remind you of the related documents that you'll have to load once you're done at the bottom of the application. In order to add a row, if you're doing your goal, you put your goal in here, and then you can add, if you have a second goal under program goal number 1, you just hit the add a row until you have all the goals in that you would like. Again, you're going to do program goal 1, and then you want to do program goal number 2, and so forth, depending on, but you have to do one for each goal and then add accordingly. Let's see, we're on 3, let's go to 4. Again, you want to provide a clear narrative and all the services that you're in collaborations you're doing within the LEA and then within the community. And these pages are pretty cut and dry. You can add if you have something specifically that's not listed here. We'll go ahead and go on to the training and awareness. You can kind of see what I'm talking about. So you'll put your topic, the audience, if it's your homeless liaisons, if it was your cafeteria staff, if you did an online training, an in-person training, and the date that you expect to do it. And then describe how you're going to ensure that someone from your homeless program does attend the NACI conference, again, in person or virtually. And most importantly, your 2021 set aside and activities that you did with 2021, and then the amount that you plan to use for 23, 24, and 25, and the activities you're going to do with that. And then, of course, you want to put your process that you use to determine your Title I Part A homeless set aside and your requested amount down here. Are there any questions? Again, go ahead, Heather, I'm sorry.
Joe is not seeing the Title IX McKinney-Vento in his FY23. Has it been placed for them yet?
No, because it has not. It doesn't open until Monday.
Okay, thank you.
I am on our test site, so that's why this is there. But on Monday, when you open up Monday morning, you should be able to find that in your ePlan application. And here in the assurances, like I mentioned, you're going to check your checkbox to make sure that you read your assurances. And then related documents, I'll go over that really quick. You're just going to upload. These are the 3 required documents. You're going to upload them here. And then these are additional supporting documents that you have to support your narratives and your homeless programs. So are there any final questions? Well, I appreciate everyone joining me today. I did forget that I needed to get you guys to do the survey for me really quick. So let me get that opened back up, and I apologize for that. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen if you don't mind. Take a quick few minutes to let us know how we're doing at the department. Your feedback is appreciated. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. On Monday, I will have, maybe by Tuesday, I'll have the recording up and ready to go. And then slides to be in ePlan as well as a tech guide on Monday morning. And here is my contact information. Again, thank you for joining me, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the day and a great weekend.
Thanks, Vanessa.